I recently did some videos on the various wild mouse coasters, and continuing along that theme is the Inverted Hairpin Coaster. How does that relate to the wild mouse, you may ask? Well, the tracks are the same, except the inverted hairpin inverts and has the car run below the track. In fact, when the ride was first introduced to the game in the Loopy Landscapes expansion of Rollercoaster Tycoon 1 way back in the year 2000, it was called the Inverted Wild Mouse. That means the inverted hairpin has the same many advantages as a steered wild mouse: tight turns, steep slopes and cost-effective designs. I don't want to repeat most of what I mentioned on the wild mouse video, as many of you will have already seen that, but if you haven't already done so, check out my video on the Seal Wild Mouse for a lowdown on these rides. In this video, I'm looking at what makes the inverted hairpin different from a wild mouse, other than having the train below the track. I mentioned the cheap cost. Here's how it stacks up against a looping coaster and its slightly cheaper cousin, the wild mouse. You'll often get really high stats with this ride. This is a combination of the tight design, which also impacts the wild mouse, plus the addition of cars which hang below the track. In my wild mouse video, I compared the steel and wooden versions by rebuilding mouse towers as a steel wild mouse. Well, this is it as an inverted hairpin version. Higher in excitement, intensity and nausea than the wild mouse. This is generally a good thing, just be sure not to let the intensity get too high for your guests. As with the wild mouse, make sure you take those tight turns below 45 km or 28 miles per hour to avoid extreme intensity caused by excessive G-force. And while I'm comparing these ride types, let's look at capacity. A 7-tile station gets me 8 4-passenger cars on the wild mouse, but I get 12 on the inverted hairpin thanks to their 4-in-a-row layout. If the stations were full length, I'd get an extra 7 cars, which equates to 28 more guests on the ride at any one time. So let's look at stat requirements, the markers you need to hit to avoid having your stats halved. If you ever build what you think is a good coaster and find it has low stats, that's probably because you missed one of the stat requirements. For the inverted hairpin, there are 6, which is the most of any ride in the game. They are a minimum drop of 6 meters or 19 feet, at least 3 drops, a top speed of at least 25 km or 16 miles per hour, minimum track length of 558 feet, that's 117 meters, plus 0.1 negative Gs and 1.5 lateral Gs, which will come from those tight turns. There are only 3 of these rides already in the game. There is Rat Flyer at Wacky Warren, Menagerie at Tycoon Park, and Hawk's Nest in the build menu. Their lack of special track pieces may not make the inverted hairpin coaster the most exciting to build, but they do make great options if you're tight on space or money, and their stats compete right up there with the bigger, more expensive ride types, making them a brilliant option for any park.